I want to introduce Chick Keller, Dr. Charles Keller, who is currently curator of the Jemez Mountain Herbarium at Los Alamos Nature Center. He's going to be talking about common grasses, the Taos area. When I looked for some more information online for you, Chick, because you didn't give me much, I found out that you are the leading expert of plants in the Jemez Mountains. You've written several booklets, many identification booklets, in addition to running the herbarium with 3,500 specimens on file. Did you start that from scratch?
It's a long story.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it at that. So Chick he considers himself an amateur taxonomist in the Rocky Mountain region, but I think all of us would say he's probably far more expert than amateur. He's the past president of the state New Mexico Native Plant Society, and he established the Jack Carter Fund, which gives grants to students and researchers and other groups every year to promote native plants. And his emphasis is on high altitude plants and daisies, which very few people concentrate on the Asteraceae family because it is so difficult. He's also an expert on grasses. And to give you a little bit more background, he retired from the Los Alamos National Lab as director of the branch of University of California Institute of Geophysics and Planetary Science. And the tidbit that I just love in reading about your background, Chick, was that you participated in 5 airborne expeditions to study the sun's corona during total solar eclipses. So having just, had one here in the United States, to be in 5 must have been pretty special. His wife Yvonne is here with him, and as you've seen in the back, we have herbarium specimens that he has brought. But I'm going to turn this over to Chick now to talk to you about common grasses in Taos.
Good evening. It's always fun to come to Taos and see old friends and see some new friends. Grasses. First of all, grasses are the most prolific plant in the world. Something like, I don't know the percentage exactly, 85% of all food eaten by people in the world are eaten by grasses, or are eating grasses. Rice, wheat, corn, sorghum, you can just go down the way. And so when you go out into the wild, you're always walking by the grasses looking for the flowers. You see, you push the grasses out of the way. And the reason is they have their own way of doing things. One of the reasons that I think grasses are so prolific is they don't rely on pollinators. There are no bees pollinating grasses. They're wind pollinated, and they cause you to sneeze on occasion. And so they don't have to rely on anybody else to get pollinated, and so and a lot of them grow by rhizomes, those underground roots. In fact, if you're collecting grasses and you don't quite know what the grass is, be sure to dig it up, because one of the first things they're going to ask you is, does it grow by rhizomes or not? Those little underground roots. Often you can tell that because there's a whole lot of them. But ones that grow by seed will do the same thing. So you have to remember that. Let's see. We got a little ground. I'm not going to teach you everything about grasses. I'm just going to give you a little introduction to them. And then I brought some of our herbarium sheets in the back so that you can look at those. And those are all on cyanide, by the way. No, I'm not sure. No, those are the Taos ones. I didn't put the Taos ones on cyanide. We concentrate mainly on the Jemez Mountains, but I've got a lot of other plants. And Taos is one of my places I always love to come and look for plants because it never disappoints. Taos area has a great number of plants. In Los Alamos County, which is 10 miles on the side, but 1 mile in vertical, there are 165 different species of grass. 165 different species of grass. I collected from Taos something like 45. but I'm sure that if you collected all the grasses in Taos County, you would get up around that kind of a number, because you also have a large elevation difference. So let's get started. Okay, I'm going to have to walk over here. The first thing you have to do with the grass is to learn the parts. And one, the parts are new, and two, the names are new. And so if you look at a grass flower, sometimes it has a lot of these, but it always has these two. These two down here are called glooms. And they always want you to know the first gloom and the second gloom. And so it's which one is above the other one, and like that. Now the glooms hold the flowers, which are called florets. And the florets are made up of two parts here. Well, a lemma, and rachis is a little stem. These little guys here are rachis. So when you look at a grass, the first thing you try to do is to determine what's above the glooms. Now, there are a lot of them that only have one floret above the gloom, just one. And that makes it pretty easy because you can ignore all the other ones. But some of them have many florets above the glooms. And then you have to work a little harder. Another thing that's interesting in them is where the leaves come off the stem. And of course, you can't call it a stem, it's a culm, but it's a stem to me. Where the leaf comes off the stem is a little joint, and there's little funny things growing in here. And you have to get used to those. Are they fuzzy? Are they papery? Are they long? Are they short? And so the juncture of the leaf. So if you're collecting grass, you want to make sure you get a few where the leaves come off the stem. Okay, let's go on. A friend of mine who's a great grass person wrote this. The grass can be gloomy. You can see where this poem's going with the glooms. In more ways than one, when classification remains to be done. You pull off the parts and soon feel your age chasing over them with the microscope stage. Now, I was asking if people would bring hand lenses. Did you get the word that you should bring hand lenses today? Because you can go and look down here at our grasses with a hand lens. A lot of nature is about 10 times smaller than we can see. Flowers, lots of other things. And so a hand lens is a really nice thing to always have because it's 10 power. It'll bring it right up to what? And of course, then it's amazing what you'll see. You peer through the lenses at all sort of bracts and hope the decision agree with the facts. While the oculus chortles in avid delight, you strain with both eyes in the dim table light. You're left with the horns of quite a dilemma while you count the nerves on the back of the lemma. You can, nerve are these little things. And how many nerves are on the glooms or on the lemmas are sometimes very important. Then you really get snoopy and turn each one turtle, turn it over, to see if the flower is sterile or fertile. Next slide. And then the compression, no problem is meaner, it's flat like a wallet or round like a wiener. How simple, you think, for a mind that is keen. But what do you do when it's halfway between? Boy, I've seen that a lot. They'll say, poa compressa. The culms are compressed. And you go, is that flat or not? Well, maybe it got flat in the press. Maybe, so those really do happen. You pray and you guess, and the florets will shatter. A little later, it's certain to matter. Long the calmness of labor, it's manual. When the question arises, is it perennial or annual? That's one of the things that you do when you dig it up. You see if it's a perennial or just an annual. By the way, one of our big nasty grasses, how many people know cheatgrass? Cheatgrasses are easy to pull up because they're annuals. And so I encourage anybody who has the time in the back for it to pull up as much cheatgrass as they can see, because it's an annual. And that terrible texture, the meanest of all, one of the pitfalls in which you can fall, cartilaginous or chartaceous, as even the experts exclaiming, good gracious. Then you wail and you wade through a long tribal key, oh, why must this awful thing happen to me? Grasses are easy, your teacher declares, as he mops off his brow, off a brow that is crowned with gray hairs. So I'll tell you another story. One of my great mentors, Roger Peterson, one of the founders of the Native Plant Society. And I used to go on Wednesdays over to Santa Fe to his herbarium, and he would figure out the plants that I had that I couldn't figure out. And he said, Keller, you got to do grasses. And he and George, what's his name, and I went down in White Rock Canyon, and we came out. I said, you picked up the same grass 40 different times and called it by a different name. And he said, Keller, you've got to learn the grasses. And I said, my mind would shrivel up if I did it. I'll wait till I retired. And after I retired, he called me. He said, okay. And so I started working on grasses. And I was totally lost. Here I was, this expert on plants. I can identify Solidago velutina and da-da-da-da-da-da. I was totally lost. But I just kept doing it, and all of a sudden, it started to make sense, and I started to figure them out. And I wanted a bumper sticker that said, this car stops for all grasses. Finally, I came out of the movie theater one evening, and I said to my wife, I think I need to see a psychiatrist. And she said, why? I said, when that guy pulled that gorgeous, voluptuous girl down into the field, into the grasses, I said, is that Western wheat grass? Well, I hope we can get you to the point where you don't walk by them and just step on them and look for the beautiful flowers. The beautiful flowers are great, and Taos is a terrific place to go look at them. So one of the great hikes is to do the long trail up to the top of Wheeler Peak by going to the left and then all around, because you spend your time going slowly through all the different elevations and that, and it's just full of wonderful, wonderful flowers. Okay, I'm going to go quickly through grasses to give you a little bit of a look. Grasses come in different shapes. Some of them are hard to categorize, but other ones are. Some of them are spikes, and when you go back there, you'll see there's a comb, and then all these little flowers are on little spikes sticking up. Timothy, phleum, is one. Let's go ahead. Next. See. And so you can see the Timothy has these nice spikes, and the flowers are all close together. Makes it hard to look for the glooms and the lemmas. But Timothy's very nice, and you have two problems, because if you go up to high altitude, down low here, Timothy is phleum pratensa, but go ahead. If you go up high, oops, I didn't have it. You'll see it back there. There's one that only has a short spike, and you see those above 10,000 feet, and they're called phleum alpina. This is one that I really like, and people tend to walk by it, but it's easy to identify. This is Spanish name galleta. What does galleta mean? Cookie or cake, yeah, galleta. It's very good for cattle. When you look at it, it's sort of bumpy. But the thing you really need to look at is this stem here. You see how that stem goes in and out and in and out and in and out. Each one of these grows, and the stem has to grow around it. And then there's this way that has to grow around it that way. It's the only grass I know that looks like that. So you're walking through the fields, and you see a grass that has a spike, like galleta, Hilaria jamesii. James got a lot of things named for him. But once you see that in and out on the stem, you know you got that one. They're little bunch grasses. Go ahead. Then there are grasses that are wider spikes. And this is a pretty common one, orchard grass, Dactylus glomerata. And the thing that characterizes it is it goes up and it has a bunch, and then steps and has a bunch and steps and has a bunch. And it's sort of bumpy like that, and you can find them. And it's certainly an orchard grass. It tends to grow in disturbed areas in fields and that. So that's a nice one. Go ahead. Then a common one is Canada wild rye. And it is a spike, but it curves over, and it's sort of spread out. Elebus canadensis. And it grows about this tall. And it's easy enough to identify that probably many of you are familiar with it, Canada wild rye. Go ahead. Then there's a grass called June grass, and it usually comes out in May and lasts through July. It's not terribly tall, but it's a spike, but it gets broader and then finer, and it's real feathery and lacy. Very nice looking plant. And you see them, you can identify it at a distance when you're walking along. There's June grass out under the ponderosa. Polariobacterium. Now, there are a whole bunch of grasses called bromes. And I'm not going to go into all the different ones. But bromes tend to have their flowers and seed pods hang sort of wide and hanging down all over the place. So if you see plants like that, they're sort of wide, flowery-looking things, but all sort of hanging down, you probably have a brome. And we probably have 20 species of bromes. Let's go ahead. Here's a brome that doesn't do that, but it's a very interesting brome, especially if you're trying to get rid of it. It grows by rhizomes. And it doesn't have that hanging downness at all. In fact, a funny story, Roger Peterson picked a grass when he was coming into the herbarium outside, and he was trying to identify it because he just got the top of it. He said, I cannot figure this out. What is this? And I said, Bromus inermis? He went, of course. Smooth brome. It loves to get into disturbed areas, and it stays there for the following reason. All the roots are held together by those rhizomes. And it tends to grow where there's been a lot of erosion or along a stream side where there's a lot of water running. And I take the teenagers and I have them all stand there. I said, I'm going to walk between you. And I just shoulder right way between them. And they look funny. And I say, now each one of you, spread your arms, grab each other, and I can't walk through you, you see. And so this plant, which is really bothersome if it gets in your garden, actually is a terrific plant because it can hold the soil against the flood. It can hold the soil against almost anything like that because it grows by rhizomes. But for some reason, they call it a brome, and I've never figured that out. Smooth brome. Go ahead. Now I'm just going to go into grasses that have all various shapes. They don't fit into this or that. They just are their own thing. Go ahead. You may see these. They're little bunchy guys, and they grow up, and you can see these long things on them. They're called awns. See, the seed is down in here. And so these things grow. And this plant and its cousins are called three-awn. Now, if the awns, those long things, come off the flower, off the top, it's an on. But if they come from the bottom, it's an off. But when you get these things and they look sort of funny, take a look and make sure that they have three awns, because then you're looking at one of the grasses in Aristida, the star grasses. Go ahead. Now, you're all familiar with this one, I think. Everybody has blue grama grass. Butalua, which is a terrible name, but it's just the name of some guy in Madrid. Senor Butalua, gracilis. But that's a good one to know, especially if you're interested in what we did in our lawn in front of it was we just filled it with Butalua gracilis. You don't have to mow it. You don't have to water it a lot. It looks really nice. And it's a real good drought-resistant grass. Go ahead. Now, there's another Butalua, and I'm not sure what Curta pendula means, but when you look at it, what you see is it's got all its florets sticking out on both sides of the grass, all the way up to the top. Look like stair steps almost. And side oats, that's what it's called. But they're pretty easy to identify. You're walking along, and suddenly there's this spike and flowers sticking out on both sides at intervals all the way up. You have to be careful if you get up above 8,000 feet. And I put it back there so you can see it. but there's a grass above 8,000 feet that looks like that, but it cheats. Instead of just being attached to the stem and growing out, it's attached to the stem here, and then it has a little stemlet, and then it grows out. So if you can take it and pull it away, you have a different one, Melaleuca porteri, Porter's melic. Go ahead. Now down on the ground, not sticking up any higher than this, just sort of moving along, is false buffalo grass, Monroa squarosa. So that ought to be pretty easy to identify when you're out walking along. Go ahead. Then there are the blue stem grasses. And blue stems are about this tall. They're called little blue stem. And I tell them you can identify little blue stem because they're big and they have orange stems. And so you see them like that. They're just really lovely going like that. And in the wintertime, you see these aren't awns. What are they? They're offs. Exactly. The fruits fall away and everything's left but just the bristles. They're called bristles. And the sunlight, especially the low winter sunlight, makes them really pretty. And so I recommend you to get to know and love little blue stem. Next, go ahead. Then there's big blue stem, and this is the one that Cornado's troops rode through, and it was growing tall enough as it was as high as their horses. So that's about 4 feet tall there. And it ends in a few spreading things with the flowers on it. But that's your big blue stem, and they can get really big. Go ahead. Then Indian rice grass, it's a good one to have in your garden. A lot of people really enjoy Indian rice grass. And each one of these fruits is hard, little hard things all over, but in a lacy sort of structure. Makes it very easy to identify once you've seen one and looked at it. Indian rice grass. Go ahead. Now, similar to it, but with very, very much smaller flowers, but still spraying over the place with these little guys all over the place, is witchgrass, Panicum capillaris. And it's a weed, an annual weed, grows about 2 feet tall and sprays out all these lovely little hard seed-like features. Go ahead. Then there's mutton grass and Poa fenleri, one of the first grasses in the spring. It doesn't have anything that recommends it so that you can look at it and say, oh, that's mutton grass. So if you see a grass that doesn't look like anything else, that's probably what it is. It's very common in the spring. And then by calling it mutton grass, you know that the cattle like it. Then there's Parry's oat grass, and I want you to. This is an assignment. You have to go up above 9,000 feet to find this grass in the high meadows. Goes about this high, and there are several grasses up there, tufts of grasses, but this one, the florets are paired. When you pick one of those, you look at them. There's 2 glooms, right? And so there's 2 florets like that paired. And you don't see anything else that looks like that. By the way, this is a picture from DeWitt Ivy's famous book. Are you familiar with this book? This book, if you just want to get started in grasses and you don't want to work your way through glooms and all sorts of stuff, this book has a real nice, good selection, very well drawn parts and over there and in the hand, what have you. The old ones had a spiral binding and fell apart, but the new ones, you order them on the web from Lulu. Can you remember Lulu? Now, if you try to order it from Amazon, they'll sell you an old spiral bind one for $60. Lulu gives you one with a very nice binding, right? And it's about $30. So I'll leave this here for you to look at. But there's an interesting coincidence here. If you think the powers above aren't helping out, I decided a few days ago that I really wanted to have this to show you, and I didn't have one of these. So I ordered it quick. And I thought, well, it won't come in time. So we left the house about 3:30 today. I walked out the front door, and there was a guy with this in his hand. If we'd have left 5 minutes earlier, we would have missed it. But I want you to take a look at that. And I'm going to leave this one for the chapter. Annuals. These are often the weedy roadside ones. And for that reason, they sometimes grow in profusion. Go ahead. There it is. How many people can identify that? Everybody knows cheatgrass when they see it. Okay. This was such a lovely version of it in Utah that I thought, I've got to have a picture of it. Yeah. This was in Bluff, Utah. Now, here's one which you can see it in the fall, August or more, just tons of it growing. And it's just sort of a stem, and then it has a bunch of these spiky things, and they don't spread out too much, just a little bit. It's just sort of a fuzzy thing like this. So this is feather finger grass, Chloris virgata. And Chloris is an annual. It can sometimes be a bother, but lots of times when you're just walking down the road or driving down the road, you'll see tons of this growing along the side of the road. Chloris. Go ahead. The other one is foxtail barley. Hordeum, it's not vulgare. This is, why did I say that? Hordeum ubatum, J-U-B-A-T-U-M. Hordeum ubatum. And it's a small annual. And again, it can grow like crazy. It can grow like crazy all over the place. And it has lots of awns, lots of fuzzy awns sticking out. Hordeum ubatum. Those are annuals, and if you want to know if it's an annual, just try to pull it out. Usually they'll come right out because they don't have a deep taproot. I have examples of the ones I've shown you. Lots of them are in this book, and there's a bunch back there in the sheet, but I didn't want to take any more time. Now, if you really want to learn grasses, well, then you do what that guy in the poem says. You get this book right here. You know, the Flora neomexicana that Keller Allred people have put out. There's a big thick one with all the flowers, and there's one for bushes and stuff. Well, this is number 3. And not only does it have all the grasses, it has all Ivy's pictures in it. So if you get this, you get Ivy's pictures for free. But then you're going to have to I'll just read this. Plants tufted, not rhizomatous. Stem bases enclosed in persistent, thickened, closely overlapping sheaths. Panicle branches widely spreading at maturity. Spikelets ovate. Blades 2 to 4 millimeters. That's as opposed to stem bases not enclosed in persistent sheath. Panicle branches not widely spread. Not at all. Blades usually less than 1. And there's 2 different. Lemmas are keeled. That means it has a rib. Lemmas are rounded. You can see how you can spend a delightful hour puzzling over just one grass. But there it is if you want to do that. Okay, now before we go to questions, I have one more proposal to do. I think, well, now that you've given your herbaria away, I don't know. I was thinking that the chapter might like to give itself a informal but fun project of collecting as many kinds of grasses in Taos County as you can find. And what I'll offer is the following. Here is a plant press. How many people know what a plant press is? Does everybody know what a plant press is? Has 2 blotters that take the moisture, and then 2 corrugated things, and then, and you pull it tight to flatten it out so that when the plant's dried out, it'll mount on a sheet pretty easily. And if it's got a compressed comb, you'll have a problem. So identify your poa compressa before you put it in press. Anyway, I'm going to donate that to the chapter. And the point is that it's very, very hard. Some grasses, when you collect them. I gave, where's Mary? Oh, yeah. I gave her a list of all the Taos County grasses that I've collected. And I realized that what I did was, loving Taos County, I collected all the neat grasses that you had. I didn't collect any of the commons. You're not going to find any Hordeum ubatum or any cheat grass or this. But if you're going along and you have a little shovel with you, because you dig them up and check to see if they have rhizomes, and you put it in plant press, and sometime you get it down to me down at the Nature Center in Los Alamos, which I, sometimes your group comes down to see the Penstons. Don't you do that sometimes? And they bring a plant press, it's all full of grasses, and I'll take on the job of identifying everything, mounting them, and then giving you all those sheets back so you can have them. So I'm aware that you got nervous about your herbarium and you gave it away. If somebody had talked to me about that, I would have tried to talk you out of it. Because UNM's a nice place to have things, but it's like losing them. Not only that, for instance, I found out that the new director, Hannah Marks, has a graduate student who's working on high altitude Colorado plants. Well, I have a ton of them. And I had 18 species of draba. You know what a draba is? It's a little crucifer about this big or this high, yellow and white and this and that. Some of them very hard to identify. So I donated those all. And you would go down and want to see them. So you go in the herbarium. They're not there. Oh, well, we haven't gotten to putting them in the herbarium. They're over there in that box. So if you go down to UNM and ask to see the Taos plants, it'll be easy to do it because I bet they haven't done anything with it. And that's why I really wish that you had kept them. Taos is a very special place, has a terrific story to tell. And for you to have just a cabinet, one cabinet with Taos plants in it would be really neat. And that would be a place for grasses. So, but anyway, if you decide it would be fun to sort of pull up grasses when you see them that look different and what have you, or even if you know what they are, pull them up and press them. I'll be willing to identify them and mount them and everything for you. So that's it. Questions? Yeah.
Actually, a comment about Dr. Peterson, Roger Peterson. I gave him a list of, 120 plants that I put together from a site in Santa Fe, just the scientific names. He looked over it for about 30 seconds, he had a red pen, he hands it back to me with about 40 corrections on it. And he spent literally seconds comprehending 120 plant names. He'd never seen the list before. And he found all of my misspellings, and he knew all of the new names that I didn't know yet. And it was just, I have never seen anything quite like it. It's just such a taxonomist.
And he's a wonderful guy besides. Wonderful guy. Yeah. That's a terrific story. It puts me in mind of an astronomy story. How many people know of the famous Harvard lady who worked on the spectra of stars, Annie J. Cannon? You should know Annie J. Cannon. What they learned to do was to take the starlight, run it through a prism, and then run it through a little slit. And so out on the graph, you got from blue to orange a picture of the spectrum of the star. Now, if the star has elements in it, those elements will absorb some of the light. And so as you go up the spectrum, you'll get little dark lines where the light isn't there. And our job, when I was a graduate student, they would give you 5 different ones. And you had to determine what kind of a star this was. Was it a giant or a dwarf? Was it a cool one or a hot one and everything else? And you did it by looking at these lines in the spectrum and comparing. And it was like identifying grasses. So like Roger Peterson. Annie J. Cannon revolutionized doing that. She was one of the first persons. Back in the early 1900s, Harvard was a good traditional place. Women weren't allowed to be faculty members. Annie worked just as a person working and doing things. She ultimately became a faculty member. She was terrific. But she came, and they had set up 10 microscopes. And under those microscopes were these glass plates with the photographs, with the lines on them. And they said, can you identify these 10 stars? And what you do with a star is, a star, if it's very hot, is A or B. And if it's very cool, it's G or K or M, and in between. And if it's a giant, then it's a 1. If it's an ordinary star, it's a 5. So our star, the sun, is a G5. And so that's how you identify them. Annie went to the microscopes, and she went B2, A6, G5, K6. And we went, how did you do that? We spent hours on these things. She said they're all friends. She says, I walk out in the hallway at Harvard, and I see a person come down the hall, and I think, let's see, gray hair, a little stoop, shoulders. I just say, good morning, Dr. Van Briesbroek. I don't. So these are my friends. And so when Roger did that, he was looking at his friends. Other questions or observations? Yeah.
Is there also a squirrel-tail barley that's different, or is it the same name for the same plant? I thought is foxtail native to the U.S.?
Well, one of the things to do is to look up common names, but there are about 5 fairly common barleys that we have, Hordeum burrinum, Pusillum, what have you, and one of those might be called squirrel tail. It sounds like it's a pretty fuzzy one, though. So let me give that a look and see what I can find. Yeah?
Are there any mobile apps that you think are particularly good at identifying? I especially want to know which grasses I should be trying to eliminate.
I haven't modernized myself enough to use mobile apps for identifying plants. Some people are very successful at doing that, but I'm not the one. One of the reasons I pretty much know what's out there. I will tell you that I had a real accident a year and a half ago in which I was walking across the kitchen brick floor, and I just passed out. I don't know what happened or anything, but I fell just like a log, flat down, crashed my face on this. And 6 months of trying to come back from all of that. You can see the hole they drilled in my head to drain it and what have you. And one of the interesting things is the genera, not the species, but the genera of almost all plants vanished from my head. And I have been going through big flower books, Oh yeah, the minute I look at them, I recognize them, but my mind threw them all away. And but they're coming back, and so I haven't had a chance to use those. And one of the reasons for that is those tend to identify the most common things, which I already know. But if I get something that's one of these ones where it's just a little bit different, or it's this or that, I don't know if those will do it. They might, but I don't know. Have you had any experience with it?
Well, I used to use a couple of them that seemed very good years ago, but not so good right now.
Uh-huh.
But I really got to get in the garden and start clearing out some things that shouldn't be there. And I'm just really unclear on what's left.
The other problem is that the wise people keep changing the names. And for instance, I thought that was interesting. There was a comment made here. When I was getting started in the 80s, the families were Cruciferae, Compositae, da-da-da-da. The family name said something about what the plants were like. Now, the family name is just one plant, one species. It has nothing to do with what they're like. And why they decided to do that, I don't know. But if you go to Roger Peterson's herbarium, he refuses to change any of them. He has gramina for grass, and he has legumes for peas. But all of the different pea plants, legumes, are now fabaceae. A faba bean. And so, in addition to that, they keep changing everything else. And so, I haven't found where they've changed the names more than 3 times. So that gives you a little bit of a problem. And the other thing they do is when they sit in a room to do that, they say, now this is a common name and it's pretty easy to say. So let's think up a name that's really hard to say. Other questions? Yeah.
Chick Keller, I have a historical question. I live up on the mesa, which is all sagebrush. And I've heard anecdotal stories that one time there were plains of grasses. I was wondering if you could shed any light on the truth of that. And secondly, is there any chance of regenerating, or would there be a benefit of regenerating sagebrush to its grassland nature?
The short answer is I don't know anything about it. The longer answer is that has happened in lots of places in which some very sturdy perennial has sort of shouldered aside everything else. And you don't see too much else. And so if you're going in among your sagebrush, it's an Asteraceae, by the way. There are very few grasses, but you'll find them. There are very few plants, but sometimes you'll find them. They're very interesting. How you would reverse that, you'd have to talk to somebody who grows plants, not somebody who doesn't know much about plants except their names.
You look and see sagebrush, and all of a sudden then you'll see an area there's no sagebrush, and it's just grass.
What kind?
Somebody else has cleared and restored there, so
What-
it can be done.
What species?
I have never gotten out of the car to take that.
That was going to be my next question, Dr. Keller. The grasses.
Just call me Chick. Just call me Chick.
Chick, the grasses you've shown, are they native grasses? And
They're
is
all
there
native.
Really a difference between native and invasive species?
Well, there's a difference. We have grasses that were brought in by cattlemen that they thought were a good idea, and they've taken over areas. And I don't know if any of them have wiped out native ones, but the vast majority of the grasses you see are native. There was a hand. Okay, so I'm going to let you go so you can down and look at the grasses back there. The most important thing to do is to find the first and second gloom and to find the lemma.